"I won't carry your heir," she swore, until the Duke discovered the secret she hid for 5 years. The boy had his eyes. Caspian Lockwood, Duke of Ravensmoor, stood frozen in the doorway of the modest farmhouse, watching a child, no more than 5 years old, chase a chicken across the muddy yard. Gray eyes, unmistakably Lockwood gray. The precise shade of storm clouds that had haunted his family's portraits for generations. "Your Grace." The steward beside him cleared his throat. "Mrs. Wintersbourne should be. I know where she is." He had come to inspect the Wintersbourne property, a small holding that bordered his Somerset estate, one he intended to purchase to expand his timber operations. The land was decent. The house was serviceable. The accounts were surprisingly well maintained for a woman claiming to be a widow living alone, though his steward had quietly noted that no record of a Mr. Wintersbourne could be found in any parish register. But none of that mattered now, because 5 years ago, at a masquerade ball he'd attended whilst foxed and bitter over his former fiancée's betrayal, he had bedded a woman whose face he'd never properly seen, a woman who'd disappeared before dawn, leaving only a silk mask and the scent of lavender on his pillow. The same scent that now drifted from the washing line strung between 2 oak trees. "Thomas," a woman's voice sharp with maternal authority, "leave that poor creature alone and wash your hands for supper." She appeared around the corner of the house, carrying a basket of vegetables from the garden. Her dark hair was pulled back simply, a few strands escaping to frame a face that was somehow both familiar and foreign. She wore no jewelry, no cosmetics, no pretense. The gray wool of her dress was clean but worn at the hem. Their eyes met. The basket slipped from her fingers. Carrots and turnips scattered across the ground. "No," she whispered. Caspian took a step forward. The boy, Thomas she'd called him, ran to her side, wrapping small arms around her legs, protective, sensing danger the way children always did. "Mrs. Wintersbourne." His voice came out harder than he'd intended. "Or is it Miss? I confess I cannot recall if you ever actually possessed a husband, or if that was merely a convenient fiction." She went pale. "Thomas, go inside. Now." "But Mama." "Inside." The boy obeyed, though he cast one curious glance back at the tall, dark-haired stranger who'd made his mother's hands shake. The door closed behind him with a soft thud. Thessaly Wintersbourne straightened her spine. Even in her simple country dress, she possessed a dignity that made Caspian's chest tighten with something he refused to name. "You should leave," she said quietly. "This property is not for sale. I've changed my mind. I'm afraid it's rather too late for that." He gestured to his steward. "Leave us." The man hesitated, then wisely retreated to the carriage. They were alone now, save for the chickens scratching in the dirt and a lazy bee investigating the spilled vegetables. Caspian moved closer, studying her face in the afternoon light. Yes, it was her. The curve of her jaw, the slight defiance in how she held herself, the way her breath came a bit too quickly. 5 years, he said softly. You disappeared without a trace. I had my reasons. I imagine you did. He glanced toward the house, where a small face peered briefly through the window before being pulled back by unseen hands. Gray eyes are quite distinctive in the Lockwood line. We've had them for 4 generations. They breed true. She said nothing. Her silence was answer enough. A blood test can confirm paternity, he continued, as if discussing the weather. My physician is discreet. Or we can skip that formality entirely, if you're prepared to be honest with me. Either way, Mrs. Wintersbourne, I will have the truth. What do you want? The words came out raw, desperate. What do I want? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I want to understand why you carried my child, bore him, raised him, and never thought to inform me of his existence. I want to know if you intended to let me die without an heir, whilst my own son played in the mud not 10 miles from Ravensmoor Abbey. You don't understand? Then explain it to me. He was standing too close now, close enough to see the faint shadows beneath her eyes, the slight chapping of her lips from the cold. Explain why you would deprive a child of his birthright. Explain why you would let me believe I was the last of my line. Because you left. The words burst from her like a dam breaking. You used me and you left. You didn't even ask my name. I was nothing to you. Less than nothing. A body in the dark. And I will not let my son be raised by a man who sees people as things to be used and discarded. The accusation struck harder than he'd expected, because she wasn't wrong. That night, he'd been drunk on brandy and rage, determined to prove to himself that he could feel something, anything, after Catherine's betrayal. He'd taken comfort where it was offered and disappeared before morning, never considering consequences, never considering her. I was not myself that night, he said finally. Then who were you? He had no answer for that. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of the boy singing inside the house. Some nursery rhyme, off-key and innocent. I want a blood test, Caspian said at last. My physician will call tomorrow. After that, we will discuss arrangements. Arrangements? Her voice was hollow. He's my heir, Mrs. Wintersbourne. The only one I'm likely to have. The admission cost him more than he'd expected, which means he belongs at Ravensmoor, learning what he must learn, becoming what he must become. You're not taking him from me. The quiet steel in her voice would have impressed him under other circumstances. I have no intention of separating a child from his mother, but neither will I abandon my son to obscurity. He paused, the words forming before he'd fully considered them. There is a simple solution, of course. We marry. He becomes legitimate. You become the Duchess of Ravensmoor. The scandal is contained. She stared at him as if he'd suggested they set themselves on fire. Marry you? She whispered. Marry the man who used me like a... She stopped herself, glancing toward the house. No. Never. I would rather starve. You've nearly done so already from the look of this place. He regretted the cruelty immediately, but couldn't call it back. You've done admirably with limited resources, I'll grant you. But Thomas deserves more than chickens and turnips. He deserves education, position, a future. He has a future, here, with me. Until what? Until you fall ill? Until the crops fail? Until some neighboring gentleman decides a pretty widow is fair game? He saw her flinch and pressed the advantage, hating himself for it. You're vulnerable here, Mrs. Wintersbourne, unprotected, dependent on good weather and goodwill, neither of which can be relied upon. I've managed this long, and you'll manage longer as my Duchess, with every material comfort, with security, with nothing that matters, she finished. Security in a cage is still a cage, Your Grace. He should have expected her refusal, should have been prepared for it. Yet somehow the flat rejection stung more than it ought. Think on it, he said quietly. My physician will call tomorrow at 10. After that, I'll return for your answer. But know this, Mrs. Wintersbourne, that boy is a Lockwood. He carries my blood, my name, my future, and I will not walk away from him simply because his mother finds my company distasteful. He turned to leave, had actually taken 3 steps toward his carriage, when her voice stopped him. Your Grace? He looked back. She was kneeling now, gathering up the scattered vegetables with hands that trembled despite her best efforts to steady them. She didn't look at him when she spoke. If I refuse you, if I refuse everything, what then? Will you truly take him from me? Force a child from his home, his mother, everything he knows? Caspian considered lying. Considered assuring her he would never be so cruel, but she deserved honesty at least. I don't know, he admitted. Ask me again tomorrow when I'm less angry and more rational. Perhaps by then I'll have a better answer. That's meant to comfort me? No, it's meant to be the truth. He climbed into his carriage without looking back. But as they rolled away down the rutted lane, he found himself turning to watch the farmhouse grow smaller in the distance. She was still kneeling there, motionless, surrounded by vegetables and regret. The boy appeared in the doorway and ran to her. She pulled him close, burying her face in his dark hair. Something twisted sharply in Caspian's chest. He told himself it was simply the shock of discovery, the adjustment of suddenly having an heir. Nothing more. But as Ravensmoor Abbey came into view an hour later, cold and vast and empty as it had been for 6 years, he found himself wondering if Thomas had ever been held like that by anyone but his mother. If anyone had ever held him like that. The carriage stopped. He didn't move. "Your Grace?" his driver called. "Shall I take the horses round?" "Yes." The word came out rough. "Yes, do that." He sat alone in the gathering dusk, watching lights appear in windows of a house that had never felt like home. Tomorrow he would return to that little farmhouse and its stubborn, proud occupant. He would demand his son. He would insist on marriage, and she would refuse him again. He was certain of it. The carriage door stood open, waiting. He did not move. Dr. Hartwell arrived precisely at 10, just as Caspian had promised. Thessaly watched from the kitchen window as the elegant carriage rolled to a stop in her yard, completely out of place among the chickens and the vegetable garden and the general shabbiness of her life. She'd barely slept. Thomas had asked 17 questions about the tall man before she'd finally convinced him it was bedtime. Who was he? Why did Mama look frightened? Was he going to take their house? "No one is taking anything," she'd promised, knowing it was likely a lie. Now, with morning light streaming through her small kitchen, she realized exactly how impossible her situation truly was. The Duke of Ravensmoor wanted his heir. Men like him didn't want, they took. And if she refused him, he had the law, the money, and the power to destroy her. The knock came, firm but not aggressive. She opened the door to find not the Duke, but an elderly gentleman with kind eyes and a well-worn medical bag. He removed his hat and bowed slightly. "Mrs. Wintersbourne, I am Dr. Hartwell. His Grace requested I call upon you and the young master." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I assure you, madam, I am here solely to establish paternity with discretion and professionalism, nothing more. And if I refuse to allow it, then I shall leave immediately and report as much to His Grace." He met her eyes steadily. "But may I speak candidly? I've known the Duke since he was a boy. He can be difficult, imperious, cold even. But he is not cruel. If the child is his, and I suspect we both know the answer to that question, then His Grace will do what he believes is right, however clumsily he may go about it." Thessaly wanted to argue, wanted to send this man away and pretend yesterday had never happened. But Thomas was already tugging at her skirts, curious about their visitor. "Is that the doctor?" he asked. "Am I ill, Mama?" "No, darling. Dr. Hartwell just wants to make certain you're healthy." The examination took less than 10 minutes. A few drops of blood, some questions about Thomas's development and health history, a thorough but gentle check of his eyes, ears, and reflexes. The boy bore it all with remarkable patience, fascinated by the strange instruments in the doctor's bag. "Quite healthy," Dr. Hartwell announced, ruffling Thomas's hair. "Strong lungs, good teeth. You've done an admirable job, Mrs. Wintersbourne." "Thank you." The words felt hollow. He packed his instruments carefully, then paused. "May I ask, purely as a physician who has seen a great deal in his years, have you considered His Grace's proposal? He told you about that?" "He tells me most things, eventually. I've been the Lockwood family physician for 30 years. Dr. Hartwell's expression softened. "I delivered Caspian himself, watched him grow from a spirited boy into the man he became after certain disappointments." Thessaly heard the unspoken story there. She'd heard whispers, of course. The Duke of Ravensmoor's legendary coldness, his former betrothal to Lady Catherine Hartley, who jilted him spectacularly for an earl's second son the very morning their banns were to be read. "His disappointments don't concern me," she said quietly. "Perhaps they should. The boy, Thomas, he has his father's eyes, yes. But more than that, he has his father's chance to be different, to grow up knowing love instead of duty, warmth instead of expectation." He closed his bag with a decisive snap. "You need not marry the Duke, Mrs. Wintersbourne, but you might consider giving him the opportunity to be more than his past has made him." He left before she could form a response. Thomas immediately ran to his toys, a small collection of carved animals that Thessaly had traded eggs and milk to acquire. and began orchestrating an elaborate barnyard drama. He was happy here, safe, loved. But for how long? She was cleaning the lunch dishes when the Duke arrived. No warning this time, simply the sound of boots on her front step, followed by that same firm knock. She dried her hands on her apron and opened the door. He looked different today, still imposing, still dressed in obviously expensive clothing that made her conscious of her patched dress and work-roughened hands. But there was something in his expression, a hesitation perhaps, or a wariness, that hadn't been there yesterday. "Mrs. Wintersbourne." He inclined his head. "May I come in?" She stood aside. He had to duck slightly to enter, the cottage clearly built for smaller men of an earlier generation. He looked around the main room, the worn furniture, the carefully mended curtains, the small shelf of books that represented her one extravagance, and she fought the urge to apologize for the poverty of it all. Thomas looked up from his toys and froze. "Thomas," Thessaly said gently, This is His Grace, the Duke of Ravensmoor. He's a neighbor." "You're very tall," Thomas observed. A ghost of something that might have been a smile crossed the Duke's face. "I am indeed. Can you touch the ceiling?" "I haven't tried. Shall we find out?" He reached up, his fingers brushing the low beams easily. Thomas's eyes went wide with admiration. "Mama can't reach that high. She has to use a stool. Your mama is considerably more sensible than I am." Thessaly watched this exchange with something approaching terror, because Thomas was already warming to this stranger, already looking at him with the beginnings of hero worship that children bestowed so easily. And when the Duke left, when he inevitably took Thomas with him, the breaking of that small, trusting heart would be her fault. "Thomas, why don't you take your animals outside?" she suggested. "Play in the garden for a bit." "But, now please." He went, though he cast one longing look back at the fascinating tall man who could touch ceilings. The door closed behind him. "Dr. Hartwell came this morning," Thessaly said before the Duke could speak. "He took blood. I assume that's why you're here, for confirmation." "Actually, I came before he'd returned with the results." Caspian moved to the window, watching Thomas arrange his wooden animals in precise rows. "Though I suspect we both know what he'll find." "Yes. He's a good boy, well-mannered, curious, happy." The Duke's voice was carefully neutral. "You've done well by him. I've done everything for him." She couldn't keep the edge from her voice, "including inventing a dead husband so my son wouldn't be branded a bastard. Mrs. Wintersbourne never had a Mr. Wintersbourne. It was a fiction, a necessary one. I've done everything for him." She couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "He's been my entire world for 5 years, and now you want to, what, take him away? Install him in that enormous abbey as the future Duke, with tutors and expectations and no one to love him? No." He turned to face her. "I want to marry you, legitimize him, and ensure he inherits everything that is his by blood. As I said yesterday, you want a broodmare, an incubator for future heirs. Don't pretend otherwise." His jaw tightened. "I want my son to have what I never had, a mother who stays, a family that's real, not merely ornamental. Then find someone else to provide it. I'm certain the marriage mart is full of suitable duchesses in waiting, none of whom have already given me an heir." He took a step closer. "None of whom Thomas already knows and loves. Would you truly prefer I marry a stranger? Bring her into his life as his new mama? Because that is the alternative, Mrs. Wintersbourne. Either you become my duchess or someone else will. Thomas will have a mother regardless. The only question is whether it will be you." The quiet cruelty of the logic stole her breath. "You bastard," she whispered. Yes, no apology in his voice, but a bastard who keeps his promises. "Marry me, and I swear Thomas will want for nothing. Neither will you. Except freedom, except choice, except the daily terror of wondering if you'll have enough coal for winter, or if the next harvest will fail, or if some illness will strike and you'll have no money for a physician." He was close now, close enough that she could see the gray flecks in his eyes. the same eyes that looked out from Thomas's face. "I'm not offering you romance, Mrs. Wintersbourne. I'm not even offering you affection. I'm offering you security, safety, and all I ask in return is that you give me what I need to secure my line. More children. Yes. No." The word came out hard, final. "I won't be used like that again. I won't lie beneath a man who sees me as a means to an end, carrying child after child until what? Until I die like so many women do. Until I've given you your heir and spare and can be quietly discarded." Something flickered in his expression. "I would never." "Wouldn't you?" She was shaking now, years of fear and fury pouring out. "You've already done it once. Used me, disappeared, left me to face the consequences alone. And now you want me to give you permission to do it again? Just with a ring and a title to make it respectable. This is different." "How? How is it different?" "Because this time, I'm not running away." His voice had gone soft, dangerous. "This time, I'm here, asking, offering marriage, not abandonment, offering everything I have, everything I am." "I don't want everything you are." The words exploded from her. "I want nothing from you except to be left alone." Thomas's face appeared in the window, eyes wide and worried. He'd heard her shouting. She forced herself to breathe, to lower her voice. "Leave," she said quietly. "Please, just leave." The Duke didn't move for a long moment. Then slowly, he reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. He placed it on her small dining table with deliberate care. "A marriage contract," he said. "Have someone read it to you if you cannot." "I can read perfectly well, Your Grace." "Good. Then you'll see that I've made certain provisions. You'll have your own income, your own household allowance, complete freedom to manage Ravensmoor's domestic affairs as you see fit, and," he paused, "and a clause stating that any marital intimacy requires mutual consent, always." She stared at him. "What? You'll not be forced, ever. If we are to have more children, it will be because you choose it." His voice had gone rough. "I am not a rapist, Mrs. Wintersbourne, whatever else you may think of me." "Then how do you expect to get your precious heirs?" "I don't know." The admission seemed to cost him. "But I'd rather die without them than become the sort of man who takes what isn't freely given." He moved toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the latch. "You have 3 days to consider. After that I'll return for your answer. If it's no," he drew a breath. "If it's no, then I'll exercise my legal right to custody of Thomas. I'll fight you in court, Mrs. Wintersbourne, and I'll win, because that's what men like me do. We win." He left. Thessaly stood frozen in her small kitchen, staring at the contract on the table as if it were a snake. Outside, Thomas returned to his toys, the moment of tension already forgotten in the way of young children. Her hands were shaking as she picked up the document and began to read. Everything he'd promised was there. Income, independence, even that extraordinary clause about intimacy, written in precise legal language that couldn't disguise its essential meaning. She would not be raped in her own marriage bed. Such a low bar to clear, such a pathetic offering. And yet, she thought about winter, about Thomas's growing feet and the boots he'd soon outgrow, about the roof that leaked in the northwest corner, and the wood that was already running low, and the very real possibility that one bad season could destroy everything she'd built. She thought about the Duke's cold, beautiful house, and the tutors, and the security and the life Thomas could have, the life he deserved as the son of a Duke. She thought about standing in a courtroom, watching Thomas being taken away from her while she had no money for a solicitor, no influential connections, nothing but maternal love to argue against the entire weight of aristocratic privilege. The decision was already made. She'd simply been too proud to admit it. That night, after Thomas was asleep, she sat down with ink and paper and wrote 3 words in her careful, practiced hand. "I won't carry your heir." She stared at those words for a long time, feeling them settle into her bones like an oath, like a vow. Then beneath them she wrote, "But I will marry you, for Thomas, and I will be your duchess, but nothing more. Never anything more. Thessaly Wintersbourne. She sealed the letter and set it on the mantelpiece, ready for when he returned. 3 days, he'd said. She couldn't bear to wait that long. She'd give him the letter tomorrow. Outside, an owl called through the darkness. She listened to it, that lonely sound, and wondered if she was making the greatest mistake of her life or the only choice she'd ever truly had. The fire had burned down to embers. She didn't bother to build it back up. The wedding took place at Ravensmoor Abbey's private chapel, witnessed only by Dr. Hartwell and the Duke's elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Thornton. No flowers, no music, no pretense that this was anything other than what it was, a legal arrangement to protect a child's inheritance. Thessaly wore her best dress, gray merino, carefully brushed, only slightly out of fashion. She'd pinned her hair up with the silver combs that had belonged to her mother, the only valuable thing she owned. Thomas stood beside her in a new suit the Duke had sent, looking bewildered and excited in equal measure. "Do I get to live in the big house now, Mama?" he'd asked that morning. "Yes, darling." "Forever?" "Yes." "And you'll be there too?" "Yes." She'd held him then, breathing in the scent of his hair, memorizing the weight of him before everything changed. The ceremony itself was brief. The vicar spoke the ancient words. The Duke's responses were clear and firm. Hers caught in her throat twice before she forced them out. "I will." The ring he slid onto her finger was gold, heavy, clearly old, a family piece. As he stepped back, she looked down at it and felt the finality of the moment settle over her like a shroud. "You may kiss the bride," the vicar said, somewhat hopefully. The Duke hesitated. For a heartbeat, she thought he might actually do it, might press his lips to hers in that traditional seal of marriage. Instead, he lifted her hand, the one bearing his ring, and brushed his lips across her knuckles in a gesture that was formal, distant, and somehow more intimate than any kiss could have been. "Your Grace," he said quietly. And just like that, she was the Duchess of Ravensmoor. The Abbey was even more overwhelming than she'd imagined. Thessaly stood in the grand entrance hall, craning her neck to take in the vaulted ceilings, the massive portraits of stern-faced Lockwood ancestors, the chandelier that probably cost more than her entire farm. Thomas had no such reservations. He immediately ran to the wide marble staircase and began climbing, his small feet echoing in the vast space. "Thomas, come back here." "Let him explore," the Duke said. "Mrs. Thornton, if you would." The housekeeper, a stout woman with shrewd eyes and a surprisingly kind smile, immediately followed Thomas up the stairs, calling out cheerfully about nurseries and toy soldiers and something called a rocking horse that had been waiting for 60 years to be ridden again, leaving Thessaly alone with her husband. The word tasted strange even in her thoughts. Husband. "I'll show you to your rooms," he said. "Not our rooms. Your rooms." She followed him up the same staircase Thomas had taken, down a long corridor lined with more portraits and Chinese vases that were probably priceless. He stopped at a door near the end of the hall and pushed it open. "The Duchess's chambers. They've been closed since my mother died when I was 12, but I've had them aired out and refreshed." He gestured inside. "If anything doesn't suit, tell Mrs. Thornton. She'll see to it." Thessaly stepped into a sitting room that was larger than her entire farmhouse. Pale blue walls, elegant furniture, a writing desk positioned to catch the morning light. Through an open door, she glimpsed a bedroom with a 4-poster bed draped in cream silk. It was beautiful. It was a cage. "Where are your rooms?" she asked. "The ducal apartments, at the other end of the hall." His meaning was clear, as far from her as possible while still being in the same wing. "You'll find a bell pull beside the bed. Ring if you need anything. Mrs. Thornton is understanding." "I'm sure she's observed many unusual arrangements in her time," Thessaly said dryly. Something that might have been humor flickered in his eyes. "Indeed. Now I have business to attend to in my study. Thomas will be settled in the nursery. It's just down this corridor, close enough that you can hear him if he cries out." He paused. "Mrs. Thornton has prepared supper for 7. I'll have a tray sent up if you'd prefer to dine in your rooms. We'll come down." She wouldn't hide, wouldn't let him see how overwhelmed she felt. Thomas should learn proper dining habits. As you wish. He turned to leave, then stopped. The library is on the ground floor, east wing. You're welcome to use it whenever you like. I noticed. That is, Dr. Hartwell mentioned you can read. I'm not entirely illiterate despite my circumstances. I didn't mean... He stopped himself, jaw tightening. The library, east wing. You'll find it easily enough. He paused at the door. And your former property, the Wintersbourne holding. I've arranged for it to be maintained and improved. Should you ever wish to return there, it will be waiting. The unexpected kindness caught her off guard. You didn't have to. I know, but I did. He left before she could respond. Thessaly stood alone in her beautiful blue prison and wondered how long it would take before the walls started closing in. Supper was a disaster of awkward silence and clattering cutlery. Thomas did his best, bless him. He chattered about the rocking horse. It has a real mane, Mama, made of real hair. And the toy soldiers. There must be 100 of them, maybe 1,000. And the enormous bathtub. I could swim in it, I think, if I wanted to. The Duke listened with every appearance of attention, occasionally asking questions that made Thomas light up with excitement. But whenever Thessaly tried to catch his eye, he looked away, focusing on his wine or his plate or anything except her. She was invisible to him, the mother of his heir, the unwanted wife, the necessary inconvenience. When Thomas finally began to nod over his pudding, Mrs. Thornton appeared as if by magic to whisk him off to bed. The housekeeper gave Thessaly a meaningful look, something between sympathy and encouragement, before disappearing with the boy. Silence fell over the dining room like a blanket. He seems happy, the Duke said finally. Yes. The nursery was mine once, and my father's before me. It has a certain history. How nice. More silence. A footman appeared to clear the plates. Thessaly noticed the man's hands trembled slightly as he worked. Everyone in this house seemed to walk on eggshells around their master. If you'll excuse me, she said, rising, I should check on Thomas. Of course. He stood as well, the motion automatic, ingrained by years of training. Good night, then, Your Grace. The title sounded wrong in his voice, mocking almost. She left without responding. Thomas was already asleep when she reached the nursery, curled up in a bed that would have fit 3 of him. Mrs. Thornton had left a lamp burning low on the nightstand. Thessaly sat in the chair beside the bed, watching her son's chest rise and fall in the peaceful rhythm of childhood sleep. She'd done this every night for 5 years, watched him sleep, reassured herself he was safe and whole and hers. But he wasn't just hers anymore, was he? A soft sound made her turn. The Duke stood in the doorway, still in his evening clothes, looking oddly uncertain in the dim light. I didn't mean to intrude, he said quietly. I only wanted to. I've never had a child sleeping under my roof before. I thought I might just... Look at him, she finished. Yes. She could have ordered him away, could have claimed this moment as hers alone. Instead, she heard herself saying, Come in then. He approached slowly, as if Thomas might shatter if he moved too quickly. For a long moment, he simply stood there, staring down at the sleeping child with an expression Thessaly couldn't quite decipher. He has my mother's nose, he said finally, and my father's stubborn chin. I used to wonder when I was younger what it would be like to see those features in my own child, whether I'd recognize myself in them. And do you? More than I'd like, perhaps. He reached out, then stopped, his hand hovering over Thomas's dark hair. May I? The question surprised her. She nodded. He brushed his fingers gently across Thomas's head, a touch so light it didn't disturb the boy's sleep. Then he withdrew, shoving his hand into his pocket as if ashamed of the impulse. He's a good child, he said. You raised him well. I raised him with love, which is more than most dukes' sons receive, I imagine. She'd meant it as an insult, but he didn't react with anger. Instead, something sad crossed his face. Yes, he said simply. More than most. He left after that, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Thessaly sat in the darkness, watching Thomas sleep, and wondering what exactly she'd seen in the Duke's eyes when he'd looked at his son. It had almost looked like longing, but that couldn't be right. Men like him didn't long for things. They simply took them. She stayed until the lamp burned low, then made her way to her own chambers. The bed was enormous, the linens crisp and perfect. She lay down in her nightgown, one of several new ones that had appeared in the wardrobe, clearly ordered by Mrs. Thornton, and stared at the canopy overhead. This was her life now. This vast house, this cold marriage. This man who was her husband-in-law but a stranger in truth. She'd sworn she wouldn't carry his heir. She intended to keep that vow, no matter what it cost her. The darkness pressed close. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. 3 weeks passed. They developed a routine of careful avoidance. The Duke kept to his study and estate business. Thessaly kept to Thomas and the domestic management of the house. They met at dinner, exchanged pleasantries, and parted without touching. It was civil. It was unbearable. But Thessaly had survived worse. She threw herself into learning the rhythms of Ravensmoor Abbey, memorizing the names of servants, understanding the systems that kept such a vast household running. Mrs. Thornton proved an invaluable ally, teaching her the unwritten rules without ever making her feel ignorant. The previous Duchess, His Grace's mother, she were a right terror. Mrs. Thornton confided one morning over tea in the housekeeper's sitting room. All airs and no substance. You, though, you got substance. I've got a spine, if that's what you mean. Exactly that. The older woman nodded approvingly. He needs someone with spine. Someone who won't wilt when he gets all cold and distant. He's always cold and distant. Not always. Mrs. Thornton looked thoughtful. When he were a lad, before his mother passed, he were different. Warm, curious about everything. His father knocked that out of him sadly. And then that business with Lady Catherine finished what his father started. Thessaly had heard some of the story from Dr. Hartwell, the Duke's famous failed engagement 6 years ago, but she'd never heard the full details. What happened? She asked despite herself. She left him at the altar, literally. Wedding guests assembled, vicar waiting, groom standing there in his best coat, and she just didn't appear. Sent a note saying she'd eloped with Mr. Edmund Hartley instead, an earl's second son with half the Duke's fortune and none of his consequence. Mrs. Thornton shook her head. The scandal were tremendous, but worse than that was what it did to him. Turned him into ice, it did. Thessaly tried to imagine it. The humiliation, the public rejection. Standing before witnesses in a church, realizing the woman you'd planned to marry had chosen someone else. She knew something of humiliation, of course, of being used and discarded. Perhaps she and the Duke had more in common than she'd thought. The realization was unwelcome. It was Thomas who finally cracked the careful distance between them. He came down with a fever on a Tuesday afternoon. Nothing serious at first, just a bit warm, slightly flushed. But by evening, he was burning up, crying for water, his small body racked with chills. Dr. Hartwell was summoned. He examined Thomas with his usual gentle thoroughness, then pulled Thessaly aside in the corridor. It's not uncommon in children his age, he said quietly. Some sort of fever. His lungs are clear, which is good, but it will get worse before it gets better. You should prepare yourself for a difficult few days. Will he? She couldn't finish the question. Most children recover fully, but you'll need to keep him cool, keep fluids in him, and watch for any changes in his breathing or consciousness. I'll leave instructions with Mrs. Thornton. He departed after leaving several bottles of medicine and detailed instructions. Thessaly returned to the nursery to find the Duke already there, standing beside Thomas's bed with an expression of such concentrated worry that it transformed his entire face. The doctor said, he began. I know what he said. She moved to Thomas's side, pressing her hand to his forehead, still burning. I'll stay with him tonight. I'll help. You don't need to. He's my son too. The words came out harsh, then softer. Please, let me help. So they spent the night together, trading off cool compresses and spoonfuls of water, monitoring every breath Thomas took. The boy drifted in and out of fevered sleep, sometimes calling for his mother, once crying out for Papa in a voice that made the Duke's hands still on the cloth he was wringing out. Around 3 in the morning, Thomas's fever spiked dangerously high. He began to convulse, his small body seizing in a way that sent terror straight through Thessaly's heart. "Get Dr. Hartwell," she started to say, but the Duke was already lifting Thomas, already carrying him to the basin of cool water they'd prepared for exactly this eventuality. He stripped off Thomas's nightshirt with practiced efficiency and placed him gently in the water. "Febrile seizure," he said, his voice steady despite the pallor of his face. "I've seen it before. My younger brother." He stopped himself. "Keep him cool. It will pass." It did pass, after the longest 2 minutes of Thessaly's life. Thomas stopped convulsing and slumped against his father's supporting arm, unconscious but breathing normally. Together, they dried him and dressed him in fresh clothes and tucked him back into bed. The Duke's hands were shaking by then. Thessaly's were too. They sat on opposite sides of Thomas's bed, watching him breathe. "You had a younger brother?" Thessaly asked finally. "Have Gabriel. He's in the Navy now." The Duke's voice was rough. "He had seizures like that when he was small. Terrified me every time. I thought I'd forgotten the fear of it, but apparently." He gestured helplessly at his trembling hands. "You did well. You knew what to do. Any adult would." "No." She met his eyes across their sleeping son. "Most men of your station wouldn't even be in here. They'd leave it to the nurse, the mother, the servants. They certainly wouldn't hold their child in a basin of cold water at 3 in the morning. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding perhaps, or simply exhaustion breaking down the walls they'd built. "I remember when Gabriel had his first seizure," the Duke said quietly. "My father refused to come. Said it was unseemly for a duke to involve himself in nursery matters. My mother was already ill by then, too weak to help. So it was just me and the nurse. I was 14 years old and I thought my brother was dying. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me something valuable." He reached out, adjusting Thomas's blanket with careful hands. "It taught me that bloodlines and titles and dynastic concerns mean nothing compared to the terror of watching a child you love struggle to breathe. A child you love." The words hung in the air between them. "You love him," Thessaly said. It wasn't quite a question. "How could I not?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time since their wedding day, he didn't look away. "He's extraordinary. Curious and kind and so full of light. Everything He stopped himself. "Everything I wasn't allowed to be. Your father sounds like he was a bastard." The 7th Duke of Ravensmoor was many things. A bastard was certainly among them. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. He'd be appalled by this. You know, the Duke of Ravensmoor sitting vigil over a fevered child like a common nursemaid. Good. Let him be appalled from beyond the grave. This time the smile reached his eyes. "You're rather fierce, aren't you? Only when it comes to Thomas." Noted. He stood, stretching muscles clearly stiff from hours of sitting. "You should rest. I'll watch him for a while. I'm not tired." Thessaly, her name in his mouth for the first time. Not Mrs. Wintersbourne or your Grace, but her actual name. "Please, rest. I promise I'll wake you if anything changes." She was too exhausted to argue. She moved to the chair in the corner and curled up, pulling a blanket over herself. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the Duke sitting beside their son's bed, one hand resting gently on Thomas's shoulder. When she woke hours later, gray dawn light was filtering through the windows. Thomas's fever had broken. He was sleeping peacefully, his color normal, his breathing easy. The Duke was still there, slumped in his chair, clearly asleep despite his best efforts to stay awake. His hair was disheveled, his shirt open at the collar, his face softened by sleep in a way it never was when he was conscious. He looked younger like this, vulnerable, almost human. Thessaly watched him for a moment. This man who was her husband, this stranger who'd held their son through a seizure at 3 in the morning. Then she stood quietly and draped another blanket over his shoulders. He stirred but didn't wake. She left them both sleeping and went to find Mrs. Thornton. There were arrangements to be made, meals to be ordered. Life went on, even after night-long vigils. But something had shifted, some small crack in the careful distance they'd maintained. She wasn't sure yet what it meant. Only that she was no longer quite as certain about who the Duke of Ravensmoor truly was. Thomas recovered quickly, as children did. Within 3 days he was tearing around the house again, racing imaginary horses through the corridors and demanding to know when he could have a real pony. But something between Thessaly and the Duke had changed that night in the nursery. Not dramatically, not obviously. Just small things. He'd begun joining them for breakfast instead of taking a tray in his study. He'd asked her opinion on hiring a new steward. He'd smiled, actually smiled, when Thomas insisted on showing him the fortress he'd built from cushions in the music room. Small things, but in a marriage built on ice, small warmth felt like fire. Thessaly tried not to notice, tried not to care. She failed at both. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. Thessaly was in the morning room, reviewing menus with Mrs. Thornton, when a footman appeared with a silver salver bearing a single envelope. "For Her Grace," he said. "From London." The messenger said it was urgent. Thessaly recognized the seal immediately. The Lockhart family crest. Lady Tabitha Lockhart, the Duke's cousin, the woman who'd expected to be the next Duchess of Ravensmoor until Thessaly's sudden marriage had destroyed that particular dream. "Thank you, Henry." She waited until the footman left before breaking the seal. The letter was brief, vicious, and terrifying in its implications. "My dear Duchess, how delightful to hear of your swift marriage to my cousin. Though I confess, the circumstances surrounding this union have generated considerable speculation among the ton. It seems your son bears a remarkable resemblance to his grace. 5 years old, I'm told. Born approximately 9 months after that rather notorious masked ball where Caspian was seen leaving with a mystery woman. How convenient that this child should suddenly appear, just as Caspian needed an heir. I wonder what society would think if they knew the true timeline. If they understood that the great Duke of Ravensmoor had married his former mistress and legitimized her bastard. The scandal would be extraordinary, the damage to the Lockwood name irreparable. But perhaps we need not trouble society with these sordid details. If you were to voluntarily withdraw from your marriage, quietly, discreetly, then I would see no reason to share what I know. An annulment could be arranged. You could return to your little farm with a generous settlement. Thomas could remain at Ravensmoor, of course, as heir, but without the taint of his mother's continued presence. Think carefully, dear cousin. Your son's future depends on making the right choice. Ever yours, Tabitha Thessaly read it twice, her hands shaking with rage. The threat was clear: leave, or face public humiliation that would destroy not just her, but Thomas as well. Bastard children didn't inherit dukedoms. If Tabitha could prove Thomas had been born out of wedlock, and the timeline was damning, then his legitimacy could be challenged. Everything would be questioned. Everything would be lost. Your Grace. Mrs. Thornton was watching her with concern. Is something amiss? No, nothing. She folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her pocket. I need to speak with His Grace. She found him in the library, poring over account books with his steward. He looked up when she entered, and whatever he saw in her face made him immediately dismiss the other man. What's happened? He was on his feet, moving toward her. Is it Thomas? Is he? Thomas is fine. She withdrew the letter with shaking hands. But we have a problem. He read it in silence, his expression growing colder with each line. When he finished, he carefully folded it and handed it back to her. Tabitha. The name came out like a curse. She's right about the timeline. Anyone who cares to count backwards will realize Thomas was born before our marriage, before you even knew I existed. Thessaly forced the words out. She can destroy us, destroy Thomas's legitimacy, and she will, unless I leave. No, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. His voice was hard, controlled. My cousin has been bitter since my father's will made clear that she would never inherit Ravensmoor. She's been waiting for an opportunity like this for years. Well, she can wait a bit longer. You're not leaving. But Thomas? Thomas is my legitimate heir. We married. I claimed him publicly. The law is quite clear on this matter. The law doesn't account for malicious gossip. If she spreads these rumors, if she makes people doubt, let them doubt. He moved closer, and Thessaly realized his calm exterior was barely containing rage. Let them whisper and speculate and clutch their pearls. I don't give a damn what society thinks. But I do, and more importantly, Thomas will. When he's older, when he understands what people are saying about him, about his mother. Then we'll teach him to ignore small-minded fools. His hands came up, gripping her shoulders gently. Thessaly, listen to me. You're not leaving. I won't allow it. You can't stop me. Even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. He could stop her, legally, financially, practically. He held all the power. But when he spoke again, his voice had gone soft. You're right. I can't stop you. If you truly want to leave, I won't prevent it. But I'm asking you, begging you, to stay. She stared at him. In 3 weeks of marriage, he'd never touched her beyond that formal kiss on her knuckles at their wedding. He'd certainly never begged for anything. Why? The word came out as a whisper. Because Thomas needs you. Because walking away now would confirm every vicious thing Tabitha wants to say about you. Because... He stopped, something unreadable crossing his face. Because I need you. You don't even know me. Then let me learn. His hand slid down her arms, not quite releasing her. We started this marriage on terrible terms. I know that. I forced you into it. But these past weeks, watching you with Thomas, managing this household, standing up to me when I'm being insufferable, a ghost of a smile. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who would wilt. Someone who would let me ignore her while she quietly produced heirs and managed the household. He looked almost embarrassed by the admission. Instead, I got you, and I find myself wanting... He stopped again, as if the words were difficult. Wanting to know you, really know you, not as a transaction, but as a person. Thessaly's heart was beating too fast. This was dangerous territory. She'd built her defenses specifically to prevent this kind of softening. That doesn't solve the problem of Tabitha, she managed. No, but I have an idea about that. He released her finally, moving to the desk to scrawl something on a piece of paper. I'm calling in some debts. Tabitha's finances are not quite as secure as she pretends. She's been living far beyond her means for years, sustained by the expectation that she would eventually inherit Ravensmoor. I've been tolerant of certain borrowing she's done against that expectation. You're going to blackmail her. I prefer to think of it as mutually assured destruction. She threatens us. I remind her that I could ruin her tomorrow if I chose. We reach an understanding. He sealed the note and rang for a footman. This goes to my solicitor in London, immediately. The footman appeared, took the message, and vanished. Silence fell over the library. Thessaly became acutely aware that they were alone, that his hands had been on her shoulders moments ago, that he'd said he wanted to know her. I should check on Thomas, she said, needing to escape before she did something foolish, like believing him, like hoping this could be real. Thessaly. He caught her hand as she turned to go, not forcefully, just enough to make her pause. Thank you. For what? For showing me that letter. For trusting me with it. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, the same gesture he'd made at their wedding, but somehow entirely different now. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm grateful that you tried. She pulled her hand away gently. I only trust you with this because Thomas's welfare depends on it. I know, but it's a start. She left before he could say anything else. Before she could analyze the warmth in his voice, or the gentleness of his touch, or the way her heart had stuttered when he'd said he needed her. It meant nothing. It couldn't mean anything. Because she'd sworn she wouldn't carry his heir, wouldn't soften toward him. wouldn't become just another convenient wife in a marriage of necessity. But as she climbed the stairs to the nursery, she found herself thinking about the way he'd looked that night when Thomas had the fever, the way he'd held their son without hesitation, the way he'd sat vigil through the darkness. Small mercies, small cracks in the ice. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat, and tried to convince herself she wasn't already halfway to making a terrible mistake. The response from Tabitha came 3 days later. A brief, furious note acknowledging defeat. She would keep her silence. The Duke had won. Thessaly should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt unsettled. Because the threat of exposure had been the last real barrier between her and the Duke, the last justification for maintaining her emotional distance. Now that barrier was gone, and she was beginning to realize something terrifying. She didn't want the distance anymore. It started with small observations. The way he always ensured her tea was exactly the right temperature at breakfast. The way he'd begun reading to Thomas before bed, doing ridiculous voices for the characters that made their son shriek with laughter. The way he'd quietly arranged for her old farmhouse to be maintained and improved, so she'd have somewhere to return to if she ever wanted it. Acts of consideration, of care, of something that looked dangerously like affection. She tried to ignore it. Failed spectacularly. It was a Thursday evening when everything finally cracked open. Thomas had been put to bed hours ago. Thessaly was in the library, her favorite room in the entire abbey, curled up in a chair by the fire with a book she wasn't actually reading. She was too busy thinking about the way the Duke had smiled at her during dinner, and how that smile had made her feel warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. Can't sleep either. She looked up to find him in the doorway, still dressed but with his cravat loosened and his coat discarded. He looked tired, and younger without all the formal trappings. "I was reading," she lied. "You've been on the same page for 20 minutes. I've been watching from the door." Heat crept up her neck. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough to realize you look as restless as I feel." He moved into the room, pouring himself a brandy from the sideboard. "Would you like one?" "I don't drink spirits." "Wine, then?" At her nod, he poured a glass and brought it to her. Their fingers brushed as she took it. Neither of them pulled away immediately. "Couldn't you sleep?" she asked. "No." He settled into the chair opposite hers, cradling his brandy. "I kept thinking about that night, when Thomas was ill. The way we worked together. It felt right, natural. Like we were actually partners instead of strangers bound by legal obligation. We were both frightened for our son. It's not the same as, isn't it?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've been thinking about that quite a lot, actually, about what partnership might look like in a marriage, what it should look like. Most marriages of our class aren't partnerships. They're business arrangements." "Yes, I'm aware." Something bitter crossed his face. "My parents' marriage was exactly that. Duty and obligation and separate lives under the same roof. My father barely spoke to my mother except to criticize her. And when she died, he didn't shed a single tear at her funeral." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It taught me what I didn't want." He took a drink. "When I was engaged to Catherine, I foolishly thought that we might have something different, something real. But she taught me that wanting more was naive. That marriage among our kind is simply a matter of breeding and maintaining estates. Until I appeared with proof that you'd already done the breeding part," Thessaly said dryly. He laughed. Actually laughed. The sound transformed his entire face. "Yes. You rather complicated my cynical worldview, didn't you?" "I'm known for being inconveniently complicated." "Are you?" He was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "I've been discovering that. You manage this household with efficiency that puts my steward to shame. You're kind to the servants, which is rarer than you might think among women of your new station. You taught Thomas to read before he was 4 years old, and you're brave enough to stand up to me when I'm being an arse." "You're rarely an arse anymore," she admitted. "High praise indeed." He smiled, but it faded quickly. "Thessaly, I need to say something, and I need you to hear it without all the walls you've built." Her stomach tightened with something between anticipation and dread. All right. I was wrong about everything. The words came out heavy, weighted with sincerity. Wrong to threaten you. Wrong to force this marriage. Wrong to treat you as a means to an end rather than a person with your own desires and fears. And I'm sorry. Deeply, genuinely sorry. She hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for it. You were protecting your heir. I understand that. No, you don't understand. Or maybe you do, and you're being generous enough not to say it. He set his glass down, leaning forward. I was protecting myself, my pride, my belief that I could control everything if I just exercised enough power. But watching you these past weeks, seeing the way you love Thomas, the way you've built a home in this cold house, it's made me realize something. What? That I want more than an arrangement. I want... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. I want what I saw that night when we sat vigil together. Partnership, trust. Someone who sees me as more than a title or a breeding opportunity. I want you, Thessaly, not as a duchess or a mother for my children, but as a wife, a true wife. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and terrifying and impossibly tempting. You want me to carry your heirs? She said, fighting to keep her voice steady, to be a proper duchess, to give you what you need. No. He stood, moving to kneel in front of her chair. I want you to be happy. I want you to want to be here with me. And if that means never having more children, if Thomas is the only heir I ever have, then so be it. I'd rather have a real marriage with you and one son than a dozen heirs in a hollow mockery of companionship. She stared at him. You don't mean that. I do. Ask Dr. Hartwell. Ask Mrs. Thornton. They've both told me I'm mad, but I don't care. His hands came up to rest on the arms of her chair, caging her in without touching her. I know I have no right to ask this. I know I've done nothing to earn it. But I'm asking anyway. Give me a chance. A real chance. Not because you're obligated to, but because you might, possibly, want to see if this could be something more than a business arrangement. Her heart was racing. This was dangerous. This was everything she'd sworn to protect herself against. And if I say no, she whispered, then I'll respect that. We'll continue as we have been, civil, distant, safe. His eyes held hers. But I hope you won't say no. Because these past weeks, watching you transform this house into something that actually feels like a home, seeing you with our son, talking with you at dinner. His voice dropped lower. I found myself looking forward to those moments more than anything else in my day. Thessaly's hand moved before she could stop it, reaching out to touch his face. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, rough with the stubble that appeared each evening. He went very still, barely breathing. You frightened me, she said softly, when you appeared at my farm, when you demanded marriage. I thought you were going to destroy everything I'd built, everything I was. I know. And then you brought me here, to this enormous house, and made me a duchess, and I was so certain I would hate it. Hate you. Her thumb brushed across his cheekbone, but I don't, and that terrifies me more than anything you could have done. Why does it terrify you? Because I don't trust this. I don't trust that you won't change your mind, that you won't wake up one day and realize I'm just a farmer's daughter who got lucky and decide you want someone more suitable. Thessaly, let me finish. She took a breath. That night at the masquerade, I thought I was invisible, just another woman in a mask. But you saw me anyway. You made me feel... She stopped, the memory still painful. And then you were gone. And I thought I'd imagined it all. The connection, the possibility. So I built walls, high ones, because I couldn't survive being seen like that and then discarded again. I didn't know, he said roughly. If I'd known, you would have what? Returned? Found me? We both know that's not true. But she said it gently, without accusation. You had your own wounds to nurse, your own walls to build. We were both hiding. And now? She looked at him. This man who'd been her enemy and was becoming something else entirely, something more complicated, more real. Now I'm tired of hiding, she admitted. I'm tired of pretending I don't notice when you smile at Thomas, or when you ask my opinion on estate matters as if it truly matters to you, or when you bring me tea without being asked because you've learned exactly how I like it. It matters to me, he said. All of it matters. Then prove it. The words came out as a challenge, not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but with small things, daily things. Show me that this is real, that you want a partner, not a duchess. I can do that. His hand came up to cover hers, still resting against his face. I want to do that. And she had to force the words out. I'll try. To believe you. To trust this. But slowly. Can you accept that? I'd wait years if that's what you needed. She believed him. That was the terrifying part. She actually believed him. Then we'll start there, she said. Small steps. No promises about heirs or dynasties or anything beyond trying to be honest with each other. Starting with this? He turned his head slightly, pressing a kiss to her palm. Is this honest? Yes. The word came out breathless. And this? He rose from his knees, never breaking eye contact until he was leaning over her chair. May I kiss you? Not as a duke kissing his convenient wife, but as a man who's discovered he rather desperately wants to kiss the woman he's been falling for. Falling for? Her voice was barely a whisper, catastrophically. He smiled, and it was nothing like the cold, controlled expression she'd seen on their wedding day. This was warm, real, vulnerable. So, may I? She should say no, should protect herself, should maintain the distance that had kept her safe. Instead, she said, yes. He kissed her slowly, carefully, as if she were something precious that might break if handled roughly. His lips were gentle against hers, seeking rather than demanding. One of his hands cupped her face, thumb stroking her cheek. The other braced against the back of her chair. It was nothing like that night 5 years ago. That had been desperate and dark and fueled by mutual need for escape. This was deliberate, intimate, a question being asked and answered in the space between breaths. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark. Was that all right? Yes. She touched her lips, still feeling the warmth of him there. Yes, it was more than all right. Good, because I've been wanting to do that for weeks. He stepped back, giving her space. But I meant what I said. Small steps. So I should probably leave now, before I'm tempted to make this go faster than you're comfortable with. Caspian. His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate. He paused in the doorway. Yes? Thank you, for asking, for waiting, for foreseeing me. Always, he said simply. He left her there in the library, her book forgotten, her wine untouched, her heart beating wildly against her ribs. She'd spent weeks building walls between them, protecting herself, maintaining distance. It had taken one honest conversation and one careful kiss to make all those walls feel impossibly flimsy. She touched her lips again, remembering. Small steps, they'd agreed. But even small steps could lead somewhere dangerous. Somewhere she'd sworn never to go. Somewhere that looked dangerously like love. The fire crackled beside her. She didn't move for a long time. It was Lady Tabitha who forced everything into the open, though not in the way she'd intended. She appeared at Ravensmoor Abbey 3 weeks after her threatening letter, arriving unannounced in a carriage bearing the Lockhart crest. Thessaly was in the gardens with Thomas when Mrs. Thornton came hurrying out to warn her. Lady Tabitha's in the drawing room, Your Grace, demanding to see His Grace. Should I tell her he's unavailable? No. Thessaly brushed dirt from her hands. She'd been helping Thomas plant a small vegetable garden, teaching him the skills she'd learned in her farming days. I'll speak with her. Your Grace, are you certain? She's in a right state. All the more reason to deal with her myself. Thessaly handed the trowel to Thomas. Keep planting those carrots, darling. Straight rows, remember? She found Tabitha in the drawing room, pacing like a caged animal. The woman was beautiful in a sharp, calculated way. Blonde hair perfectly arranged, expensive dress in the latest fashion, Jewelry that probably cost more than Thessaly's entire former farm. Mrs. I do beg your pardon, Your Grace. Tabitha's smile was poisonous. How quickly one adjusts to new titles, Lady Tabitha. Thessaly kept her voice level. I wasn't aware you'd be calling today. I'm here to see my cousin. Where is he? In his study, but he's asked not to be disturbed. I'm family. He'll see me. He'll see you when I tell him you're here, which I will do after you explain the reason for your visit. Thessaly moved to pour tea, playing the perfect Duchess despite her dirt-stained dress. Earl Grey, or would you prefer something stronger? Tabitha's expression suggested she'd prefer poison. I don't want tea. I want answers. My solicitor informs me that Caspian has called in certain debts that I have no means of repaying immediately. How unfortunate. Don't play innocent with me. This is your doing. You've poisoned him against his own family. I've done nothing except be honest with my husband about your threats. Thessaly sat, arranging her skirts calmly. If he chose to respond by exercising his legal rights regarding debts you'd accrued, that was his decision, not mine. You think you've won? Tabitha leaned forward, eyes glittering with malice. You think you can play Duchess and everyone will simply forget what you are, a nobody, a farmer's daughter who spread her legs for a duke and got lucky enough to conceive. Careful, the word came out cold. You're speaking about the mother of the duke's heir, the Duchess of Ravensmoor. Mind your position. For a moment, genuine hatred flashed across Tabitha's face. You don't deserve this, any of this. The title, the house, the money. It should have been mine. I'm a Lockhart. I have noble blood going back centuries, while I have something you'll never possess. Thessaly finished quietly. His respect, his trust, perhaps even his affection, none of which can be purchased or inherited or claimed by bloodline. Affection? Tabitha laughed, but it sounded brittle. You delude yourself. Caspian doesn't know how to feel affection. He's ice through and through. He married you for the boy, nothing more. Once you've given him another heir or two, you'll be as discarded as the rest of us. The words hit harder than Thessaly wanted to admit, because wasn't that exactly what she'd feared? What she still sometimes feared in her darker moments? Perhaps, she said. But that's between my husband and myself. It certainly doesn't concern you. Everything about Ravensmoor concerns me. This house, this title, it's my heritage too. And I will not stand by while some common. That's quite enough. Caspian's voice cut through the room like ice. He stood in the doorway, expression thunderous. Thessaly, are you all right? Perfectly fine. Lady Tabitha was just leaving. No, she wasn't. He moved into the room, and despite everything, Thessaly felt something warm bloom in her chest at the way he positioned himself slightly in front of her. Protective. Because before she goes, we're going to establish something very clearly. Caspian, Tabitha started. Your Grace? He corrected sharply. When addressing the Duke of Ravensmoor, you will use my proper title, just as you will use Her Grace's title when addressing my wife. Are we understood? Tabitha's face went white with rage. I asked you a question, cousin. Yes, Your Grace. We're understood. Good. Now then. He clasped his hands behind his back, every inch the Duke. You will apologize to my wife for your inexcusable rudeness. You will then leave Ravensmoor and not return unless explicitly invited. And you will cease spreading rumors about Her Grace's origins, our marriage, or my son's legitimacy. If you do not, I will not only call in your debts, I will ensure every door in society closes to you. Every invitation withdrawn, every connection severed. You'll find yourself quite thoroughly ruined. You wouldn't try me. His voice was soft, deadly. I've been far too lenient with you, Tabitha. Far too willing to overlook your schemes and your bitterness. But threatening my family? He shook his head. That I will not tolerate. Silence stretched through the room. Tabitha looked between them, Caspian standing firm and implacable, Thessaly seated calmly with her dirt-stained hands folded in her lap, and seemed to finally understand that she'd lost. My apologies, Your Grace, she said stiffly to Thessaly. I spoke in haste. Apology accepted. Thessaly kept her voice level, refusing to show the satisfaction she felt. Tabitha left without another word, her expensive skirts swishing with barely contained fury. They heard the front door slam, then the sound of her carriage departing at speed. Caspian immediately turned to Thessaly. Are you truly all right? What did she say to you? Nothing I haven't thought myself in darker moments. She stood, brushing at her dress absently. She called me a nobody, a farmer's daughter who got lucky. You are neither lucky nor a nobody. You're the woman who raised my son, who runs this household better than anyone in generations who... He stopped himself. What I mean is, her words are poisonous nonsense. Are they? She met his eyes. Be honest, Caspian. Isn't there a part of you that agrees, that looks at me and sees someone who doesn't quite fit? Someone who will always be out of place in this world? He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. No, there is no part of me that thinks that. But I suspect there's a part of you that fears it, that waits for me to confirm your worst suspicions about yourself. She couldn't deny it. The fear had been there since that first day, lurking beneath everything else. The fear that she wasn't enough, would never be enough. Thessaly. He took her hands, dirt and all, in his. Look at me. Really look at me. She did, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. I know we started badly, he said. I know I forced this marriage. But these past weeks, watching you, talking with you, learning who you actually are beneath all your defenses. He drew a breath. I've fallen in love with you. Completely. Catastrophically. In a way I didn't think myself capable of anymore. The words struck like lightning. Caspian, I don't expect you to say it back. I'm not even sure you believe me. But I need you to know, before anything else happens, before we take another step forward or back, I need you to know that when I look at you, I don't see a farmer's daughter or a convenient wife or a means to an heir. I see the woman I want to spend the rest of my life knowing, loving, building something real with. Thessaly's throat had gone tight. You said you didn't know how to feel affection. Tabitha said that, and she's wrong. I know exactly how to feel it. I've just been too afraid to try after Catherine. He pulled her closer. But with you, it doesn't feel frightening. It feels right. Like I've been waiting for you without knowing it. I swore I wouldn't carry your heir, she whispered. I made that vow to protect myself. I remember. And I told you I'd accept it. I meant it, Thessaly. I'd rather have you, just you, than a dozen heirs with someone else. But I'm starting to think... She had to force the words out. I'm starting to think I might want to break that vow. Not because you're forcing me, not even because of duty, but because when I imagine our future, I see more children, your eyes, my stubbornness. Little people running through these halls because we created them together, from love, not obligation. His hands tightened on hers. You mean that? I'm terrified, but yes, I mean it. She looked up at him, this man who'd been her enemy and had become something infinitely more complicated. I love you. I don't know when it happened. Probably sometime between you sitting vigil with Thomas and learning to make my tea just right. But I love you. And I want more than what we agreed to. I want a real marriage, a real family, everything we were both too afraid to hope for. He kissed her then, not carefully, not gently, but with all the pent-up feeling of weeks spent dancing around each other. She kissed him back, her dirt-stained hands coming up to tangle in his hair, his arms wrapping around her waist to pull her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. We should probably talk to Thomas, she managed, about what this means, about the future. Later. Let me just... He kissed her again, softer this time. Let me just have this moment. No titles. No expectations. Just us. Just us, she agreed. They stood there in the drawing room, holding each other while afternoon light spilled through the windows and outside in the garden. Their son planted carrots in careful rows, unaware that his parents had just chosen each other. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. 18 months later, the nursery at Ravensmoor Abbey had never been so full of life. Thomas, now 7 years old and every inch his father's son, was teaching his little sister the proper way to arrange toy soldiers. Grace Catherine Lockwood, 9 months old, and already displaying the family's trademark stubbornness, kept knocking them over and laughing. She doesn't understand strategy yet, Thomas explained seriously to his father. She's 9 months old, Caspian replied, bouncing his daughter on his knee. I think we can forgive her lack of military acumen. Thessaly watched from the doorway, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. 5 months along with their third child. A boy this time, Dr. Hartwell predicted, though she'd be happy either way. Come away before they rope you into playing too, Caspian called to her. I've been informed I make an unsatisfactory Napoleon. You're far too tall, Thomas said helpfully. Napoleon was quite short. How do you know that? Mama taught me. She's been reading me history books. Caspian caught Thessaly's eye and smiled, that warm, unguarded smile she'd learned to treasure. Of course she has. Your mama is forever full of surprises. She crossed the room to join them, settling into the chair beside her husband. He immediately shifted Grace to one arm so he could take Thessaly's hand with the other, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Tired? He asked quietly. A bit, but happy. Good. He squeezed her hand. I've been thinking. Once this little one arrives and we're all settled, perhaps we should take a family trip. Show Thomas and Grace the world beyond Somerset. The world beyond Somerset involves traveling, Thessaly pointed out, with 3 children. Dr. Hartwell assures me it builds character. Dr. Hartwell doesn't have to manage 3 children in a carriage. Thomas looked up from his soldiers. Are we going on an adventure? Possibly, Caspian said. Would you like that? Will there be horses? Undoubtedly. Then yes. They spent the afternoon there, the 4 of them, soon to be 5, playing and talking and simply being together. No titles, no expectations. Just a family who'd found each other through imperfect circumstances and chosen to stay. Later, after the children were asleep, Thessaly and Caspian walked through the gardens in the warm spring evening. The vegetable plot Thomas had started was thriving now, expanded and properly maintained, a small reminder of where they'd begun. Do you ever regret it? Caspian asked suddenly. Marrying me? Giving up your freedom for all this? Do you ever regret forcing me into it? She countered. Every day. And every day I'm grateful you agreed despite my abominable behavior. She smiled. Then no, I don't regret it. Because this... She gestured at the house behind them, full of children and warmth and life. This is what I always wanted, even when I was too afraid to admit it. A family, a home, someone who sees me. I see you. He pulled her close, careful of her belly. I'll always see you. I know. That's why I stayed. They stood there as twilight deepened. 2 people who'd been forced together and had chosen each other anyway. Who'd built love from necessity and created something real from what should have been merely transactional. Inside, Grace started crying. Thomas called for water. Life continued, messy and imperfect and absolutely, utterly right. We should go in, Thessaly said. In a moment. Caspian kissed her temple. Let me just have this. The quiet before the chaos. The chaos is the best part. Yes, he agreed. It really is. They went inside together, hand in hand, to the family they'd made. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If you enjoyed following Thessaly and Caspian's journey from necessity to love, I'd be grateful if you'd share your thoughts in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Which character resonated with you? I read every comment and your feedback means the world. Until next time, stay lost in stories.